In this modern world of so-called diversity, especially in academia, some of these numbers, some of these facts might seem almost unbelievable. Maybe to some of you, some of us already know, but I'm here to confirm it for you. Today, somewhere between 75 and 80% of all practicing psychologists in the US, those are the ones that are actually diagnosing, and the clinical psychologists, 75 to 80% of all of those are women. In counseling and social work, the numbers climb even higher, often in the 85 to 90% range. We'll get to this in just a moment. And that imbalance doesn't just happen by accident. And it's not just a snapshot of the current workforce. The graduate pipeline to the American Psychological Association's own reports shows that women account for about 4 out of every 5 psychology doctoral students, meaning that the future of the profession is locked in to this skew for decades to come. Think about that. For decades. Listen, I am expecting this deep dive series to be about 5 parts. That's the way I've got it planned out right now. For those of you who are returning, you know that my release of my deep dive videos come in individual parts in sequence over a few days. And then I release the full length of all of that content in one longer video. So here's the outline for this full deep dive, barring any last minute changes. Part 1, which you're about to watch right now, is about the numbers of male and female therapists and a little bit of relativity regarding that. Part 2 will be shaping the pipeline, and I'm planning for that to include universities, mentors, institutional pressures that promote and facilitate the dominance of women in the field. Part 3 will be about when therapy meets ideology, and this is, I think, going to be my favorite one. That will include therapists' politics, their activism, their extreme personal proclamations. And then we'll move on to part 4 to try to answer the question, does therapy work equally for men and women? We'll dissect that quite a bit. And in part 5, what I right now expect to be the closing of this deep dive series, part 5 will address the business of therapy, including the rise of telehealth and the scrutiny of BetterHelp and similar businesses in the last few years. So let's get into part 1 of this deep dive, the gender gap in therapy. So I'm just going to leave this infographic up here, I think maybe for the duration of part 1 here. And this comes from the American Psychological Association's very own reports. According to their report, and others that I found, today approximately 72% of clinical psychologists are women. Again, that comes from the APA a few years ago. Counseling psychologists are about 84% women. School psychologists, the one who are advising your young boys at school, those are 88 to 90-ish% women. Licensed clinical social workers, those are a lot of times the ones that maybe your partner, your wife or girlfriend is asking you to go to therapy with. 87% of them, and even more particular here, marriage and family therapists. These are the ones you're going to couples therapy with. 78% of them are women. So if I adjust this just a little bit, I think this comes from ChatGPT. So this is just an overall kind of summary based on what ChatGPT could find. I'll scroll back and forth a couple of times between this and the APA report, just occasionally for your own reference. But I'll just stick between these two throughout the duration. But listen, when we talk about diversity in academia and the helping professions, psychology rarely gets mentioned. Yet it's one of the most gender imbalanced professions in the United States today. People want to talk about tech, STEM fields. Nobody, you will never hear anybody speak a word about the gender imbalance in psychology fields, especially those in clinical form. The American Psychological Association's workforce data shows that 76% of practicing psychologists are women, leaving men at only about 1 in 4 positions. If we narrow in on counseling psychology specifically, that imbalance widens even more, in which 84% of counseling psychologists are women. School psychology, as I mentioned a moment ago, is nearly completely dominated by women at close to 90% of female representation, and among licensed clinical social workers who carry a large share of everyday therapy work, women make up 87% of that workforce. Women in family therapy, again, shows us the same pattern. Women holding about 78. That's nearly 8 in 10 of those jobs. And across the board, men are a minority, and not even that. They're scarce. The graduate pipeline does not correct this imbalance. We'll get into this again a little bit more in an upcoming part. What it does is it makes it even worse, the pipeline. According to the APA's own graduate study in psychology report, 79% of doctoral students in psychology are women. That's the students that are learning right now, or as of 2 or 3 years ago. 79% right now in training are women. At the master's level, particularly in counseling, the numbers tilt even further, with women accounting for 85 to 87% of enrollees. Again, these are the students that are in school right now or in the last couple of years. And to put that into plain terms, for every one man entering a counseling master's program, there are about 5 women. That ratio guarantees that the next generation of therapists will be at least as female dominated as the current one, if not more so. Again, like I said, this will go on for decades. I believe that it is important to point out that it has not always been the case. Back in the 1960s, men still made up nearly half of the psychological workforce. And in specialties like clinical psychology and psychiatry, they held the majority of positions. But enrollment patterns began to shift in the 1970s, 1980s. That's when most of us were born, most of us that watch my videos. And that's about the time in which women started to outnumber men in graduate programs. By the 1990s, women had become the clear majority across almost every track in psychology. Historian David Baker and psychologist Ludi Benjamin documented this transformation, showing how debates in the 1960s and 70s around affirmative action, access to graduate programs, and gender roles set the stage for the feminization of psychology. Fast forward decades, and today, what we see is that psychology is now grouped alongside nursing, elementary teaching, and human resources as one of the most heavily feminized professions in the country. Again, let me just reiterate this again. I'll bring up this other infographic here, right here. Again, clinical psychology, approximately 78% women. Counseling psychology, 74%. School psychology, up to 90%. Licensed clinical social work, 87%. Marriage and family therapy, again, 78%. Nearly 4 in 5. In many of these fields, men don't even represent 1 in 5 providers. In school psychology, social work, it's closer to 1 in 10 by some estimates. These are not marginal differences. They're structural realities. And for a male client seeking for a male therapist, holy Jesus, the odds are immediately against him. If only 1 in 4 psychologists is male, or only 1 in 10 social workers is male, then the chance of getting that match is slim at best from the very start. So here's what's coming up in the rest of this dive. What's coming up is I will show that because research shows that outcomes and satisfaction often improve when therapist and client are of the same sex, the same gender, the lack of male providers becomes more than just a demographic fact. I argue, and I think I'll provide enough evidence, that it is in fact a barrier to access and effectiveness. So when we talk about the gender gap in therapy, we're not speculating about biases or making cultural guesses. The imbalance is visible in hard numbers, in hard percentages, reported again by the APA themselves. From graduate enrollment, we'll take a look at that in just a little bit, all the way through professional practice. Psychology and therapy are now overwhelmingly female professions. I know many of you already know this, but I'm coming back hard and fast with this again. And those numbers show that the imbalance is growing. It's not shrinking. No one is doing anything to fix this diversity.